One of my favorite features in LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga is the ability to go back to previously beaten levels and bosses and play through them with any character you want. For example, do you want to mend the broken ties between Anakin Skywalker and the Tusken Raiders? Well, you could easily have the two beat up on Darth Maul together. With this feature, I pretty much immediately knew that I had to do whatever possible to bring Darth Jar Jar to life. For those who don't know, Darth Jar Jar is a fan theory stating that Jar Jar Binks was secretly hiding an affiliation to the Sith in the prequel trilogy and especially the Phantom Menace. Now, although this theory is frequently memed on, I do think there's a real potential there, knowing how much George Lucas loved the character and knowing that he changed Jar Jar's trajectory after fan backlash. My goal was to beat the bosses of the prequel trilogy using Jar Jar. It might be difficult, Jar Jar may struggle in certain combat situations, but I thought it would be possible. Was it? Well, that's what we'll be talking about today. Specifically, I decided to put Jar Jar against Darth Maul in Episode 1, Count Dooku in Episode 2, and Grievous, Anakin, and Palpatine in Episode 3. I decided to skip the second Dooku fight because beating up on an old man once was more than enough for me. A few things I noted. First of all, unfortunately, pretty much every single level had at least one roadblock preventing a Jar Jar solo run, or even running Jar Jar with a helper like a battle droid. Most of the time between boss stages, you need to either flick a button or climb up a wall or do something similar, and that almost always requires a Jedi. And given that Jar Jar was hiding his Sith powers, it usually wasn't possible without switching to an ally. Where it was possible, however, I also ran into the problem of most boss stages have at least one point where you need to use a lightsaber user to engage a QuickTime event. So, soloing through with just Jar Jar unfortunately turned out to be impossible. That being said, Jar Jar ended up being surprisingly proficient in combat. These are the broad strokes of what I realized. First of all, Jar Jar's best attack is absolutely devastating, especially against General Grievous. If you jump and then click B on an Xbox controller, Jar Jar will do a power slam, like many of the characters do. The interesting thing about Jar Jar is that if you hit it perfectly on top of an enemy, he will power slam multiple times in a row. I could wipe out like half of one of Grievous's life bars simply by doing this, and I don't think he can be knocked out once he's starting this process. I think if you really want to min-max your Jar Jar skills, you'd want to do XXA to get the enemy in the air with a juggle, then use the B power bum move as many times as you can get off. Another really good move that Jar Jar had was the light heavy combo, where he basically punches an enemy twice then falls on him. That can be comboed into other moves. With that being said, let's talk about my process of going through this grand adventure. First off is Episode 1 and the Darth Maul duel. Now, I was admittedly learning the ropes here, so I was a bit worried at the beginning about Jar Jar's combat effectiveness. His standard punch is nowhere near as effective as a lightsaber swing, and he takes a lot of damage, especially where he cannot block. With Jar Jar, you have to play very aggressively, you have to keep the combos going, and when possible, you've got to put yourself and the enemy in the air. I also initially struggled against the battle droid legions until figuring out, of course, that Jar Jar does have that big area of effect bum slam. We made light work of the destroyer droids, even sometimes employing Jar Jar's ranged ability. He throws one of those Gungan energy balls, but we were unfortunately kicked out of the battle in one of those sequences where we're forced to play a Jedi, specifically where it's that 2v1 against Darth Maul. I also got kind of annoyed because sometimes the game would switch me to either Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon, and I'd lose Jar Jar from my quick select menu, so I'd have to go in and choose a new character in the sort of clunky menu system, all while being attacked. Jar Jar's run animation is amazing. It hints at a hidden grace, especially when his tongue starts flying. We made quick work of the obstacle course. We needed the Jedi to get through the energy barriers, but eventually Jar Jar alongside his helpful battle droid were able to make quick work of Darth Maul's final stage. After that, we moved on to Episode 2 and the Count Dooku fight. I have to say, Episode 2 is probably my least favorite episode in the entire game, and this has got to be the worst boss fight. It is an absolute slog. It is so boring. You spend more time slowly walking through dark caves and doing basic puzzles than you do actually fighting Count Dooku. Jar Jar's got a nice quick roll, and I actually found the combat sections to be really fun. Dooku's got a different fighting fighting style where he's got lots of lunges and whatnot, but the in-between sections almost always required a Jedi, whether I was climbing up a wall, hitting some switches, the in-between stuff before I'm juggling Dooku's goofy ass with my finely honed Gungan muscles. If only Jar Jar wasn't hiding his true Force abilities, and if he would actually use the secret lightsaber he keeps under his robe, this all would have been much more simple, but it is what it is. In the last sections of the fight, we're pretty much prevented from using Jar Jar totally. The second that Yoda shows up, we're locked in, which sucks. For the fight against Grievous, I decided to keep Commander Cody, who was obviously aware of the upcoming Order 66, and this is where I discovered Jar Jar's true combat potential. We absolutely dunked on General Grievous with no regard for cyborg life, and I will say it was actually really fun being able to put together several of those ground pound attacks. Given that Jar Jar is technically a good guy character, and I think also a Republic character, he could also step in for sequences you'd otherwise need Commander Cody for, like where you're calling in Republic reinforcements. But unfortunately, I think more than any character, Grievous is one who locks you into frequent lightsaber fights. You have to cut off each one of his 4 arms. So the game does the thing where it auto switches you back to Obi-Wan really frequently. Next up, we have the battle against the pretender to the throne, the lesser of the Sith Lords, Palpatine himself. Now, actually, I had a really funny, I don't know if it was a glitch or just a feature. When I spawned, instead of having Captain Typho help me, who I covered in a video yesterday, make sure you check that out, I actually had Tarful instead, the other big T. I decided he would be a fine companion for Jar Jar, and we gave battle against Sidious. Sidious was actually the toughest opponent in my opinion. He does a lot of damage, he's not easily staggered or knocked back, and I couldn't chain together multiple bum slams against him for whatever reason. His boss fight level is also my favorite, not only because of the changing stages, but because you can pretty much do the entire fight without having to rely on any weird puzzles or whatever else. I absolutely bodied Palpatine when we got to the Senate chamber. He could not withstand my Gungan onslaught, which was fun to see. He got so mad, in fact, that the game actually locked up and I couldn't progress any further. I went back and replayed it later and there was no problem, but as you can see here, Palpatine just gained infinite health. I thought I might need to switch to Yoda to damage him. That did nothing. If anyone knows why that happened, feel free to let me know down in the comments. We have, however, now the final battle, Anakin versus Darth Jar Jar. This was an interesting one because this battle handles companion characters different than the other ones do. For most of the battles, with some exceptions, your 2 characters or sometimes 3 characters, like in this battle, actually stand together for the entire time. But during the Battle of Mustafar, for most of the level, the droid characters are off on their own. At one point, I actually swapped Jar Jar into one of those. He was locked into the position for a while, but after I passed through that big room where Anakin slaughters all of the CIS High Command, the fight was pretty much just Obi-Wan and Anakin, and all Jar Jar and the droids could do was watch from far away, which, you know, as the big Sith Lord, that's kind of appropriate. You're seeing your new apprentice being formed, you're seeing the battle between good and good. These are the strings you've been silently pulling since the Phantom Menace. So, can you beat LEGO Star Wars' Darth Jar Jar? Sort of. Combat-wise, Jar Jar's got some really good moves. He's got 2 great combos that you can use very effectively against bosses and other units. But until someone mods Darth Sidious to look like Darth Jar Jar, which someone needs to do, you will be stuck in certain sections. But guys, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. A little bit funnier, a little bit different than normal. Let me know what you think down below, and if there's anything else you'd like to see me cover in future LEGO Star Wars videos. Till next time, guys, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.